Hey there, I'm Robin Woolner, and I'm going to be talking to you today about developing healthy ego through play. Question for you. Um, did you learn more when you were in school, inside or outside of the classroom? When you think of who you are today, think about this. Uh, were the major lessons, the fundamental skills that brought you to where you are today, were they learned inside or outside the classroom? Okay, that kind of gives me feedback about where you're coming from in terms of learning, knowledge, and skill. All right, so um, I want to start with a little story. So I'm actually graduating this quarter, but I took some time off from school. Um, I took a little bit of time off, and during that time, I rode freight trains. And it was after months of research and interviews, studying maps of train lines. And on this one day, it was midnight. My friend dropped me off at the Oakland train station near Jack London Square. And it smelled of diesel, and um, you could hear the trains, their whistles in the background. And all of a sudden, this train pulled up, and it stopped. Right in front of me was a boxcar with the door open, and I walked right over to it and just threw my bag in and hopped in, and away I went. And that was the beginning of a huge journey that has changed my life in tremendous ways. From this train and from this adventure, I met all kinds of really significant teachers and friends. Mentorships came out of this, apprenticeships came out of this, and a whole new way of exploring the world and what the world means to me came of it. I changed through this experience, but I also I was malleable to it, but I also realized the world is malleable. I can engage with it, interact with it, and change it. And so I did that in a number of different ways. I co-founded a bakery and an urban garden. I was a lead teacher at a homeschool with multiple age levels where I designed curriculum and implemented it. So what I'm going to be exploring today is why free play is really important when we look at learning and developing skills to be a change maker in the world. But before I get started, I just want to give a little credit how these ideas came to be. One person and place that was really significant was Play Mountain Place. This was a free school that I was a teacher at summer school with. And one of my co-workers, Jake Dotson, introduced me to Ken Wilber. And he suggested that, well, Jake Dotson suggested that ego development and play, there's a correlation between those two. So I have Jake to thank. You should check him out. He's doing very interesting work. And then the other institution which I got to engage with and help organize a little bit was this thing called Tent University, which was kind of this school that functioned on almost emergent principles. It was a very bottom-up organized system in which the participants got to kind of define what the school was, what the context and content of the classrooms were. And that was another thing that inspired what we're going to be discussing today. So what are we discussing today? Emotional intelligence, how freedom actually is important for emotional intelligence, how ego development is a good way of measuring growth in terms of freedom, and how risky play is also essential in terms of growth, which leads to wisdom, which is, who doesn't want a little bit of that? So, kids are incredible creatures. One thing that never ceases to amaze me is the level of emotional authenticity that kids have. They are so real with their feelings. They're so real in general. They're very authentic. And it makes me wonder, why are there not as many adults who are so authentic with their feelings the way there are with kids? So let's explore that. So if we look at emotional intelligence, and this is the 6 seconds model, think, feel, act, we can look at it as an ecology where if you inhibit one, it's going to have an effect on the other. If you're only allowed to think certain things, it's going to have an effect on how you feel and act. If you're only allowed to act certain ways, it's going to affect the way you feel and think. Now, school partitions play and work into these 2 very separate categories. And the way you are allowed to act in play and work are very different. And what I am going to suggest today is that it's the way that actions are allowed during work that affects our emotional intelligence as adults. So let's look at the school environment. There's specific actions that are okay, and they mainly have to do with kind of these cognitive learning styles. So like repetitive writing. It's a lot of sitting. You can see all these kids, they're sitting. They're all facing one direction. It seems like it's okay to move their hands to write, but it's not when you see a kid in a playground and they have a lot of freedom to move and act and kind of have a agent will, they look very different. When we look at Peter Gray's definition of play, self-directed, intrinsically motivated, mental rules that creatively create structure that's kind of adaptable, imaginative, alert, non-stressed mind, we have to ask, is play allowed in the classroom? And I'm going to say that it's not. The learning experience says, keep play out of this. This is serious stuff. And I think that choice is a huge reason why we have challenges with emotional intelligence as adults. It has to do with action and the way that action affects feelings and thoughts. So over the last 20 years, there's this analysis of creativity in kids, and they found that there is, in fact, a diminishing ability to express emotions, to be creative, and to look at things from a different angle. So this kind of this suggests that there is a numbing force that's taking place in our schools. And while we are developing certain kinds of thinking, really strong abilities in terms of thoughts, there is a numbing in terms of feelings. And this is all connected with what kind of behavior is acceptable in the classroom. So that's not good, but that kind of amplifies when you think about the world today. There's big problems in the world, and we need people that are able to act, that are able to interact, to see this world as a malleable object. And we need to be training these people to be interactive with the world. That's kind of that's agency, your own inner drive. Here's some examples of big problems. There's globalization. There's a Wahrani gentleman. One of my teachers actually here at UCSC works with the Wahrani. Anyway, climate change is a big problem. Inequality. Another thing that's kind of interesting is you look at the way the information economy and just the global economy is shifting. And you can see there's a rise in abstract skills and a diminishing rate of routine and manual tasks. So um, when we're thinking about education reform, we have to remember that routine and manual tasks were part of an old economy. They were part of kind of the factory economy that's being, well, in the United States, it's certainly less present, but even globally, as everything becomes more mechanized, it's just becoming a less present part of our life. And we need to start looking at our new ways of modeling an education system. So in terms of the large problems, though, they can be looked at in terms of disconnections. This is what this guy, Otto Scharmer from MIT, he explores the big problems in the world in terms of disconnection. Some examples he's given that kind of describe these three I put up here is the disconnection between financial and real economy, the disconnection between infinite growth and finite resources, haves and have-nots, GDP and well-being, governance and voiceless in our system, technology and real needs of society. So there's some big problems. In many ways, these big problems are symptoms of these types of disconnections. And so what I'm suggesting is that we need to reconnect. So how can we reconnect? Let's look at kind of some school models and look at areas where reconnection could be possible. So here's a little diagram of kind of a traditional school model. This is how we see, this describes how schools function today. So there's 3 areas to school that are kind of the overarching principle. There's the epistemology, that's kind of knowledge formation, how knowledge is treated, where it comes from. There's the goals of school and the overall organizational model. So these are kind of the forms that make up school, and that creates a traditional school, which creates these students. Here they are raising their hands and sitting in their seats. So traditional schools have a behaviorist epistemology. What that means is that knowledge is kind of the solid product, and it's the teacher's job to take this knowledge and put it in the empty vessel, which is the student. So students are very passive in this model, and knowledge is very physical. It's this physical thing that you can take and put there. It's translatable. So in terms of the goals, there's cognitive goals, reading, writing, math, arithmetic, that kind of thing. There's the civic responsibility, how to be a citizen in the democratic project. And then, of course, vocational skills, how to become a contributing member of our economy. And then how is it organized? Schools today are organized in a fairly authoritarian model, and what that means is that there's a top-down decision-making process with regards to what students learn and how they learn it. And that authoritarian approach, I think, has a lot to do with the disconnection we were talking about earlier. So knowledge is seen as a product. That's the behaviorist thing. It's very abstract. You're not in the real world. You're in your books. You're writing. You're reading. Again, that cognitive skill is really central. And then freedom is marginalized. There's kind of a pathway. People know what the pathway is, and students are expected to follow that pathway. So an informal learning model, and areas where this could be exploited immediately are recess areas, food areas, break times. This is areas where you could start implementing an informal learning model immediately. And informal models, the epistemology is humanist, where humans are kind of central, your own ability to be agent, the center of your universe, free, where you choose your own growth, that is kind of the epistemology. Knowledge has to do with your own relationship to it. And in that way, knowledge is more of a process. It's not so much what you know, it's how you come to it. The goals are ego development, collaboration, and innovation. And these are just what happens when you have free people together. I would suggest in a proper environment that nurtures that. And the organizational model would be democratic. And I don't mean democratic in kind of the traditional let's all have one vote model as much as there is a less hierarchical approach to deciding what the learning environment is going to look like. And that's what play is. And so informal learning environments create these kids doing, here they are, doing their informal learning. What this suggests is this might be a method. This is a way of reconnecting kids. This is a reconnection process. One thing we need to consider, though, is, in the face of this kind of chaotic situation, how do you measure growth? How do you know if kids are learning? How do you know if this model is working? Ego development looks at the way your awareness expands. It looks at how your worldview changes, and along with that, kind of ideas of motivation, morality, cultural values, openness to differences, that kind of thing. And it takes place, ego development takes place intrapersonally, meaning your ability to see yourself, and interpersonally, meaning your ability to interact with others. So there's a lot of different models of ego development that are out there, and it's exciting because it suggests that there is, they're here. These are models you can use to kind of design a system and also analyze students to see how they're doing and give them support. So just really briefly, and you don't need to really look at all of these, but I just wanted to kind of show you that there's all these corresponding models. This one here is Loevinger. She developed this. She was one of the first people to develop this model. And so this is her ego development model. And it goes, she goes into further definitions of these. And I wish we had time to go into more depth with this, but we don't. But anyway, spiral dynamics, we'll look at an example of spiral dynamics next. This is Kohlberg's. He looked at morality, how morality changed. Maslow, hierarchy of needs, that's really popular. Looks at motivation. And then here's another corresponding one with the Loevinger, it's Gruder. And she looked at she went into more detail in terms of some of the ones down here, the what she called construct aware and unitive, and kind of what are some of the further reaches of ego development. But let's look at an example of what this is and how it could be used as a model. So, so this is spiral dynamics, and this is kind of like a worldview mapping system, and it's neat because the way that an embryo changes in terms of you kind of go through the whole evolutionary history in your embryonic phase. Consciousness is like that too. You go through the cultural evolution of your species in your lifetime. So you get to experience being a caveman, and you get to experience kind of being part of an animistic tribe. The next step is what it would be like to, the red is kind of like personal gain. Think about a master and a slave, or kind of feudal lord serf. At times, kind of poor corporate practices could be seen in terms of this level of the world. If you were to expand your consciousness beyond that, be at the blue stage, that's a loyalty to higher powers. Think about Orthodox religions, think about Boy Scouts. If you were to move beyond that, this is kind of the orange would be, it's ultra rational. It's really organized, very strategic. The university is a very orange place. Competitive marketplace is very orange. It has brought us a lot of the technology and innovation and knowledge in general we have in the world today. So it's a really exciting and very new level of development. Green, think about post-structuralism, postmodernism. Think about it's consensus-based modeling. Think about Sierra Club, Greenpeace, some feminist movements, really concerned with non-hierarchical, egalitarian, fair situations. If you move beyond green, that's kind of the first construct aware, where you realize that there is kind of this developmental pathway. So yellow's really into kind of deeper connection with feelings. You might say that it's kind of a 6 seconds type of place. Relationships are a little bit more fluid in terms of power dynamics. It's not so much focused on consensual relation. Well, it's not so much focused on consensus-based decision-making as a fluid power exchange that is fair, and that works. So turquoise looks at turquoise people are often really compassionate. They're really into harmony, to unity, seeing the world as interconnected. So this is kind of an example of a tool you could use to look at where a kid's at and what ways they could expand, and it kind of creates a way of it's a map of the chaos that is the free play environment. That's all well and good, but how exactly does learning take place? How do you move from red to blue or blue to orange? What is that process like of learning, you might call it, in this model? So it has to do with paradigm shifts. Do you see here a rabbit or a duck? Are you able to see a rabbit and a duck at the same time? That's kind of hard. Paradigm shifts are kind of the key. So the ego holds the world in place, and when something happens that breaks, that kind of challenges some of your basic assumptions or beliefs, some kind of inconsistency, it could be caused by something physically happening to you, an injury, it could be a death, social, emotional, political, spiritual, all kinds of, these are the kind of experiences that often induce these shifts. Ken Wilber called them catalytic conversions. It was a catalyst that kind of shattered your worldview and caused you to reconstruct it a little bit bigger so that it could include these new things that you weren't prepared for. How do we design an environment, so like thinking about a recess area, that would encourage this kind of growth to take place? So here's a fast diagram. So you can read it from left to right or right to left. If you go from right to left, that's looking at what you provide in order to get at here at the end, you have growth/learning. So according to Carl Rogers, in order to get to creativity, you provide psychological safety, psychological freedom, and those two things create an internal locus of evaluation. That's a student evaluating their own job, their own work at being, well, I guess in this case, playing and exploring their environment. It also creates an openness to new experience and the ability to toy with elements and concepts. And all of those provide a creative person. But how do you move from creativity to growth? That's the question. How do you kind of move to that next stage? The answer is risk. Risk is really interesting. It gradually, by gradually exposing oneself to higher levels of risk, the students have the ability to overcome fears and phobias. This is kind of the curative catalyst. You gently expand your worldview. You gently put yourself in a scary situation. Kids love putting themselves in a scary situation, and it's this biological urge to grow. And it's very much connected with creativity. And in that way, free environments are providing the skills to be innovators and creative problem solvers. Think about in the office world, they're really leaning more and more towards this. There's kind of these common areas that are becoming more popular, and they're very excited about this concept called creative collisions, where people come together and ideas, it's kind of the water cooler effect. New ideas come from these kind of serendipitous encounters. And this is someone who's able to creatively collide is someone who has these skills in terms of play and who are open to the new perspective and the creativity needed to open yourself to new perspectives. So there's studies that by developmental psychologists and evolutionary psychologists that's suggesting that this is in fact the case, that play is essential in this kind of development. And there's also kind of a risk in terms of design of mixing psychological safety, which kids do need a lot of support in order to be effective in this environment, with physical safety. In our culture, there's been an emphasis on physical safety, and you can look at the history of playground structure and regulations and kind of the legalities around playgrounds, and see that there's been a huge emphasis on physical safety and not necessarily as much focus on psychological safety. And the paradox is that psychological safety is what kids need. If you just have physical safety, you're actually diminishing psychological safety. And so that is the role of the teacher in these environments. The role of the teacher is to assess the student, make sure that this is a psychologically safe environment, and to kind of provide the support and resources for the kid to agently develop. So I want to suggest that this is the kind of support that allows a student to develop skills in complex problem solving. And complex problem solving is really important because there's a lot of complicated problems in the world today associated with those disconnections we were talking about earlier. So a complex problem can be defined as something that has emergent properties, lots of info that's always increasing, and components that are constantly adapting and shifting to each other within the system. So how do you solve a complex problem? And what does play have to do with it? Well, there's two approaches to solving complex problems. there's strategic planning, and emergent problem solving. Now this guy, Jeff Mintzberg, also of MIT, no, that's Henry Mintzberg, he feels like strategic planning is really limited with regard to complex systems and problem solving in complex systems. Strategic planning works by having an end goal, having a series of steps to reach that end goal, and that's all based on how you expect a complex system to respond to these steps. But complex systems are always changing, and sometimes it's very difficult to anticipate how it's going to respond. So investing in strategic planning, and by the way, almost all of education is structured strategically. It's almost a temple to strategic planning. So anyway, it's limited. There's a new movement that's starting that's written about in this book, Social Labs, in which they're calling for emergent problem-solving teams. And that would be kind of a unilateral group of diverse members that make up part of this complex problem, where they work in these little micro-social labs where they work at solution principles. And the goal is creativity and emergent innovative problem solving. Seems to me that play is really essential. It's what they're doing is play, and people that have a background in play are skilled at this kind of work. When we think about play, then we can think about it as having two really specific purposes. It allows for personal transformation through spiral dynamics or ego development, and it allows for skills that allow someone to interact with complex systems and transform them. It works by staying present, being open to possible futures, to creatively exploring a complex system, being able to change as it changes. And this is kind of the key to the change. And small inner work has larger effects. If you look at from an EQ model, someone who develops depth in terms of their think, feel, acting, their interpersonal skills, that has an effect on a group. And when you have a group that has emotional intelligence, that has an effect on society. And a society that has a lot of emotional intelligence is, again, going to affect the individuals. So basically what I'm arguing is that we need more Yodas in the world. Yoda was an extremely emotionally intelligent being. And as we inoculate the world with more and more Yodas, we are going to shift to a very different world. I see play as essential to that transformation, and I want to suggest that school could be a place where we could start experimenting with putting play in a more central stage. So school is where that takes place. So thank you.